As he was kicking them, the thread did break, and Gandadwo and all the beings fell back into hell again. His earlier kind thought had given him a chance to escape, but his bad thoughts had drawn him back to suffer again. It seems that one thought can determine one's fate. It all depends on whether that thought is good or evil. From a Buddhist perspective, and also from a Hindu perspective, all your good choices land on the credit side of your moral ledger, and all your bad choices end up on the bad side. And when you die, they ring it up like in a cosmic cash register. And if you've done good, you move a little closer to nirvana or liberation. If you don't, you slide a little further down. It's all about the karma. It's not about God. It's a simple mechanical, mathematical formula. And that's a very different idea from sin the way many of us grew up. A kind of idea that you might know from another story, Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter. In that story, talking about Hester Prynne, condemned because of the act of adultery, she was consigned to a little world with which she was outwardly connected. And it now and then appeared to Hester that the Scarlet Letter had endowed her with a new sense, says Hawthorne. She shuddered to believe, yet could not help believing that it gave her a sympathetic knowledge of the hidden sin in other hearts. If truth were everywhere to be shown, a scarlet letter would blaze forth on many a bosom beside Hester Prynne's. Sometimes the red infamy upon her breast would give a sympathetic throb as she passed near a venerable minister or magistrate. Again, the mystic sisterhood would contumaciously assert itself as she met the sanctified frown of some matron who, according to the rumor on all tongues, had kept coal snow within her breast throughout life. That unsunned snow and the burning shame on Hester Prynne. What had the two in common? You'll note that Hawthorne is not writing about people doing bad things, but thinking bad things. The appetite for evil is apparently a sin all by itself. The act is merely what we would call in theology an outward sign and seal of an inner truth. Have you ever noticed that all the deadly sins that I mentioned earlier are all feelings, not acts? Lust is wrong, not just adultery. Greed, the desire, is as wrong as the actual theft. Envy is pure resentment. Pride, sloth, gluttony. Feeling those things is a sin. The inner one offends God, who, of course, can read all your thoughts and is keeping a very detailed ledger. The other one offends humanity. So even if you never do a bad thing to another person, God knows you're thinking these wicked thoughts, and you are doomed. Because no one ever lived without a single sinful thought, right? Well, except Jesus, right? Oh, and one other person. Do you know the joke? We learned this in seminary. Seminarians have jokes. They're quite bad. So the story says that Jesus is standing before the crowd, about to kill the woman taken in adultery as portrayed in John. And Jesus famously says, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." And sure enough, a stone flies in and strikes the woman on the head. Jesus turns angrily and says, "Oh, mother, must you ruin everything?" I couldn't resist. You former Catholics, you get that one, don't you? Is it a sin to think sinful thoughts? For a lot of people it is. And humans have been trying to overcome evil thoughts forever. Monks around the globe, across the centuries, have prayed and meditated to purge and purify their minds. Even when we don't do bad things, we can be tormented by bad thoughts. It was John Milton who put into the mouth of Lucifer in his great poem, Paradise Lost, that the mind can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. So we can torment ourselves with evil thoughts all the time. On the other hand, last week I quoted Gregory Maguire, the author of Wicked, the book upon which the show is based, who said that everyone has the appetite for evil. If you give into it, the act is evil, but the appetite is normal. Some of you may know the great poet Mary Oliver. She has a splendid poem that's in our hymn book that says, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." I told you I had no theories of evil. Evil and sin happen by accident or on purpose because that's the way reality is. Why that is true is beyond me to explain, and I believe it's beyond anyone to explain. At best, there are some very elegant guesses. They make for interesting conversations and no end of books, but bad acts, I maintain, are indisputably real, and I don't have to explain why to understand what makes them bad or evil. That can be explained without a God, without karma, without anything beyond human knowledge. What all sins have in common, what makes them wrong, is that they tear the fabric of life. By which I mean they harm others, they interrupt the world, they break our trust, they introduce pain, they tear the fabric we depend upon. To illustrate this, I'm going to tell another story, and I just happened to come across this yesterday. Do you know the program called The Moth Radio Hour? I see some nods. Good for you. It's on that famously left-wing station, NPR. I was just listening to it yesterday, coming back from attending synagogue and thinking about this sermon in the back of my head when I heard a story told by Jeffrey Rudell. He describes when he came out as gay to his parents in 1982. They were calm at the time, he said, and while I was driving my car back to college to take my final freshman exams, my mother was busy going through the house where I grew up and was gathering up things I made for her when I was in 4-H, a box containing the letters I had written them from school. She was removing the photographs from the wall and directing my father to take the bed and the desk and the lamp and the Smith Corona, all of it into the front yard, but not too close to the maple tree. My clothes, my books, my bookcases, my report cards, my shoes, everything that was my life. And with my brother and sister and grandparents watching, my mother removed a cigarette from her case, lit it, and threw the match onto the pile. And it burned for 7.5 hours. There's much more to the story. You can hear it on the website. I tell it because this is a sin. It tears a hole in the fabric of that family. She literally tore her son out of her life and burned a hole in her own world. Years later, the son almost sees his mother, but she sees him from a few feet away and literally turns around and walks away. Years later, the next day, a funeral wreath was delivered to his home in memory of our late son. I know I can't understand that kind of intense rejection. I know that most fairy tales suggest that there is a parent who can or might do just that. So it's a fundamental fear that we have. But there is so much more. Go another direction for just a moment. Across the street at Civic Theater, they're producing Fiddler on the Roof. Stories by Sholem Aleichem gathered together. And one of those stories, the tale of Chava, his daughter, after losing two of them to marriages, one he couldn't plan and one to someone he couldn't choose, Chava comes to him and says, I'm marrying a Christian. Doesn't even say that she's asking for permission. In fact, she does it automatically because she knows that he will not like it. And those who know the story, who know the musical, know that at that moment he says, you are dead to us. It's the same kind of rejection, perhaps, but I'm sure to Jeffrey's mother and to Chava's father, they experienced the child as having torn the fabric. They were simply closing the door behind a terrible pain. And that's the point I want to make right here. I want to take a few moments to say, why do we commit such awful acts that tear the fabric of life? Well, one of them is that we can hurt a great deal.